Welcome to Just One Thing for Parents. I'm Bettina Honan. Today I was joined by Alex Leedham. Alex is a clinical psychologist and she works in the field of neurodiversity, particularly with families with autism and other specialties as well. But she talks about this really interesting question of what parents of children with autism can do to stop their child from becoming overwhelmed. And she talks about the idea of a social battery, which is kind of similar to the idea of the energy accounting system. And she talks us through in detail what this looks like and how it can be helpful for parents of children with autism. I mean, it's relevant for all people, to be honest, but it's particularly relevant for our neurodiverse population, where some of the typical aspects of everyday life can be extremely draining for their social battery. And there are maybe different things for them that fill up their social battery. So if we can get a really good grasp of what those things are for our young people, it can really make family life so much easier. So please keep listening for my interview with Alex Leedham. So hello, Alex. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
So the question for you is, what is just one thing parents can do to protect their autistic child from getting overwhelmed? So perhaps you could start by just saying why you chose this question, why this feels really important for you.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the social battery, which I can say more about what that is, but it just comes up so much in the assessments that we do, in the feedback appointments we do with parents. It comes up so much, this kind of question of, how do we stop our child becoming so overwhelmed and how do we help them cope with their emotions and regulate their emotions and what can we do? So it feels like it comes up in every appointment. So it felt like a helpful one to think about. And it's quite concrete and clear. And, lots of people seem to be able to get on board with the idea of it, including children themselves, depending on their abilities. So,
okay, I'm intrigued to hear more, but I just wanted to say that I really agree with you. And I think when a child gets a diagnosis, often parents can, well, sometimes there can be a bit of guilt about why didn't I do this before, but it can kind of throw them a bit and they can think, oh gosh, what does this mean now as a parent? And this, how much do I push them? How much do I expect of them? And so I think you're right. This is such a lovely tool that gives parents and children something concrete that they can kind of hang on to and really think about. So tell us a bit about what this is.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I guess we all have a certain amount of energy for coping emotionally, physically, etc., a certain amount of resources. And if you imagine it almost like a battery, we have a certain amount of charge, and things will drain that charge or drain that battery and drain our energy and make us not able to cope or not feel okay. And there'll be also things that recharge that battery and make us feel better or able to cope or able to feel okay. So the idea, of the social battery is, there are several things for autistic children that will drain their battery and maybe more things than for a child who isn't autistic. And actually there's this idea that, you can put things in place to sort of proactively help them and sort of get ahead of some of the things that might drain their battery to mean that it doesn't get down to zero all the time. There's always going to be points when it does, and there's always going to be points where we can't predict everything. But I guess the idea is that we can come up with a bit of a battery charging list that we can use as a proactive support option, I guess, for families to put in place, but also other places that, can be shared with school or grandma's house or other areas. So everyone knows what are some of the triggers for my child becoming overwhelmed? What are the things that drain their battery? What can we do to help? And what can we help them to learn as well? Every child's going to be different, obviously, but some children will be able to build some skills of their own that will go on their battery charging list. And others, it'll be more environmental adaptations. But I guess the idea is that we have this sort of drain list and charging list. And
so it's literally a list. So you would write down, here are the things that drain me. Here are the things that charge me.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Right.
I mean, that's how we tend to do it as a bit of a worksheet. Here's a battery draining list, here's a battery charging list. It's not always easy to identify what's on each, and that might be a process in itself. And it will differ at different points. Some things won't drain you on certain days, but they will on others. Um,
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not
yeah,
just, so it's kind of quite context. I mean, I think,
yeah,
the idea that everybody does, it is different for everybody is kind of intuitive, but also not. It's like, actually, it can be very different. And I think that's where a diagnosis comes in, doesn't it? Sometimes
yeah.
for some people, they get very filled up. They would be recharged spending time with their friends, but with other people, they would be out of battery spending time with their friends.
Exactly. Children, a lot of autistic children may get drained by being in a social situation, but they might get charged by being in a social situation with their close friends who they're able to share an interest with, or they're able to talk on a topic that they're comfortable talking about,
Yeah.
but they may get drained with more chit chat or less purposeful conversation. For example, there might be things that drain them a bit more. So there's something about the type of socializing that might be a bit much for them, or maybe the environment when they're socializing might also be busy and noisy and too much
Mm.
from a sensory point of view, which is also draining them. And so
So
it
you
would
can get quite
depend.
specific
Yeah,
about in
yeah,
your list about
yeah,
this type of social situation would, be good and this would be less good, or this would feel what's the language? This would charge me and this would drain me. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
exactly.
Is
Yeah.
this the same? They talk about the energy accounting system and they also talk about spoon theory. Are these the same things?
Similar things. Spoon theory is
Similar.
slightly different, but yes, you'll definitely hear the kind of energy accounting, or some people say energy battery, mental battery. So you probably hear different terms for the same sort of thing, but
Yeah.
I guess the idea is there's that sort of in and out process.
Yeah.
How much do we have in our resources? How much do we have in our battery? How
Yeah.
much is it charged, or how much is it drained? And similar
Yeah.
with that energy accounting, it's like how much is coming in and how much is going out, and
Yeah.
how do we get a balance, I suppose, and
Yeah.
stop
Yeah.
coming down to zero.
And I
Yeah.
think the spoons thing I was reading came about from somebody who was working with people who have physical health conditions, and the idea that you start with 15 spoons a day. I suppose that's slightly different. You start with 15 spoons a day, and that when the spoons have gone, you're kind of empty. Is that the idea?
Yeah, similar concept, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, definitely. And I guess also similar to things like the stress bucket idea. If you're
Okay.
getting full and overflowing, then it's
Mm.
maybe slightly the opposite way around, isn't it? It's kind of filling too much and needs emptying a bit. It's similar concepts, but it's again
Mm.
that sort of, yeah, how much capacity, I suppose, do you have for coping within a day? And what is a way that we can understand that, and how can we proactively support someone with that? So, how do we, for example, with the sort of battery idea, how do we keep charging that battery throughout the day rather than just letting it get down to zero? And then we just have to respond by recharging when they're already completely depleted at the point of shutting down, meltdown, whatever it is.
Mm.
Is there a way to keep those charges, just mini charges happening
Yeah.
throughout the day? And they might be quite simple or small things like a break or five
Mm.
minutes in a quieter space, or it could be that those charges are small,
Yeah.
but often we need to know that they're needed in order to do them.
Yeah. 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 And why is this particularly relevant for children with autism?
And, we'll all have a social battery, so everyone can be drained. You don't have to be autistic, but for autistic children in particular, there's going to be lots of things in their day that contribute, lots of factors kind of building up throughout the day. So there might be things like the environment from a sensory point of view. It's noisy, there's lots of overlapping sounds, lots of smells, whatever it is, lots of sensory stimuli potentially in the environment. Plus, some children might be struggling socially in that context. So that's going to be draining their battery. They
Mm.
might be struggling emotionally. There might be a change or a transition that they're coping with, or, and it might be things that maybe we don't notice as that, like, oh, someone was sat in my seat and I had to sit in a different seat, or something that for an autistic child might be a harder change.
Right.
Um, and, a child might be masking or, kind of hiding their needs a little bit in a certain context, which takes a big drain on their resources. So there's often several factors just with coping day to day,
Mm.
depending on the context and depending on how much your needs are known and adapted to, that might
Mm.
mean it's hard to keep your battery anywhere near the top. Um,
Yeah.
and actually, the more we understand that, the more we can support people, I guess, who are autistic. There's more factors for them.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
really about a match, isn't it, between the child and their environment. And
Yeah.
in what is a typical environment, it's set up for people with a certain type of brain, but people with an autistic brain find some of those everyday things much harder. And so it drains them more.
Yeah.
Is that one way of looking at it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it might be that your battery doesn't really get to 100 very easily,
Yeah.
um, or it might only get to 100 maybe in the summer holidays or at a time when you're in a certain context, because yes, the environment is so key. Um, and yeah, or you might just have a headache or, start the day off a bit tired or not feeling well. So there's always going to be factors, but yes, for an autistic child, there'll be more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And is this relevant for children, teenagers, adults?
Yeah, all of the above,
All
anyone
of the
that
above.
can be
Okay.
autistic.
Do you
Yeah.
do you have a list?
Do I have a list? Yeah, I do have a list. Yeah, I can give you some examples.
Yeah, it'd be great actually to
Yeah,
hear just some example.
yeah,
I mean, it doesn't have
yeah,
to be yourself, but maybe of a family you've worked with, just to,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, applies to anybody, everybody, it's I hear people using the term nowadays as well. A lot of
Yes, I
people
do.
will say, do you? Yeah, people will say,
Yeah.
oh, my social battery's drained. And I think, oh, it's become more language that people use. Um, an example, I don't know, for a child that you might be working with, it might be things that drain them are socializing, kind of communicating in certain contexts. It might be being in busy environments. It might be doing an exam or something like that. It might be, yeah, coping with a change, or it might be going to a party
Mm.
or, going to a setting where there's new people. There's a range of different things that it could include that really
Right.
drains someone's battery, I suppose. And you can tailor it to individual needs. But they might be some of the kind of common things, communication differences, misunderstandings, misinterpretations that come up a lot. They might happen
Mm.
a lot in someone's day.
Mm.
It might be a child who's not able to communicate as well, or they're able to communicate, but maybe not able to speak. So
Yeah.
always interpreted correctly. Um, yeah, I've got a bit of a list here actually. I'll just have a look at it
Mm.
because I did just make a few notes because thinking, what are some of the common things that come up?
Yeah.
Making a mistake, that comes up a lot, especially more for teenagers or,
Yeah.
children who are perhaps slightly more perfectionist in their
Yes.
style, which we see a lot with autistic children, struggling with making a mistake, engaging in chit chat.
Mm.
But sometimes it's the type of social situation, as I mentioned. So it might be, a teenager who now her and her friends start going out for coffees and things, but it's very heavily reliant on chit chat. Whereas they can cope well if they go to bowling or something because there's an activity when
Yes.
it's not as chat based, but actually
Yes. A
just
bit more
sitting.
structured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas just sitting and chatting might be something that really drains somebody. Yeah, there's a range of things, but those are some of the common ones I would say that kind of come
Yeah.
up for people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. So it
Yeah,
enables you to plan a bit more with a young person. I
yeah,
always think, when I am working with families who have neurodiverse children, they say, oh, we've got a holiday coming up, and I know it's always really stressful, and how am I going to manage? So this could be a great tool, couldn't it? To say, well,
yeah,
let's have a sit down and think, like, what are going to be the things about maybe going on a plane, the uncertainty, the waiting, the noise, or whatever it is, they could be a real drain. So what do we need to put on the other list? Well, give me some examples of the things on the what do you call it? The charging and
charging list.
yeah, the
Yeah,
charging list.
yeah. You can call it whatever. Obviously, it's just a kind of
Yeah.
coping list, I suppose. It might be things like, okay, well, when my child comes home from school every day, they are absolutely overwhelmed and at the point where they might have what you might call a meltdown. So maybe that's what could go on the charging list is 30 minutes of quiet time with their headphones because that's what they need. They don't need to talk in that moment, for
Yeah.
example. They need a bit of time and a bit of time out. Or, yeah, if for the going on holiday example, it might be things like creating resources to help them to prepare for what to expect, having chance to look on the website of where they're going to go, or
Mm.
I don't know, having chance to look. There's so many options online now and on Google Maps and do the journey, or
Mm.
whatever it is that gets them able to prepare. There's lots
Yeah.
of adaptations other people can make, I suppose, that can be on that battery charging list.
Mm.
But it also might be in regular breaks or noise filtering headphones for
Yeah.
certain environments, or just picking the time when you go to certain places.
Yeah.
Or
That
yeah,
that could be
yeah,
huge.
yeah,
You say you'll have traveled, so actually I think you're going to be down to like, 10% by then. So let's not plan to go out to dinner because we know that takes 20. I don't know if you put numbers on it,
yeah,
but maybe that could be a way of
yeah,
planning, couldn't it? And then
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't tend to put numbers on it, but absolutely you could. And some children, if they really relate to numbers and engage with numbers, absolutely, you can do it that way, whichever way works. And
Yeah.
you might also just add things on the list like stroking my dog, wrapping myself up in a blanket, going for a walk.
Mm,
I don't
mm,
know, they can be quite small, but there's just if you've got this really big list, you've got stuff to choose from rather than in the moment
mm.
thinking, oh, what do we do? Like everything's
Yeah.
just too much and too overwhelming. It might be, okay, we've got a few things to pick from here.
Yeah.
Or we can do them beforehand as well. Because we know, okay, going on holiday is going to be stressful. So
Mm.
what can we do to sort of mean that they start off partway charged at least
Yeah,
before
yeah, yeah.
it's off? Um,
Nice.
and that might just be okay. I needed a bit of time in a quiet space for a little bit, or a chance to go out on my trampoline and let off some energy before we go, or
Yeah, yeah.
whatever it is that's on the list. And that can
So
be
great.
things they do or things other people do, I guess.
Yeah, because I think in those moments of meltdown, I think parents can feel very overwhelmed, start getting into very black and white, like really negative kind of interpretations or labels of children. And children can feel really bad too, because so it's not only, it strikes me, it's not only about really helping parents to think about what the child needs, but also really helping the child to tune into themselves and go, what is it about me that charges and drains? And that self-awareness is so helpful, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that might take a time, that might be
Yeah.
a process to help a child to understand a bit more about that. And it might be that, the parent is doing it more for them to start with and gradually they're building up that awareness. But absolutely, if you can involve children in that learning about themselves and also over time learning some of the patterns or what were some of the things that drained me or
Mm.
oh, each time I got that upset, I was in this kind of environment or
Mm.
that kind of thing. You start to learn, okay, maybe that's happening for me again now.
Yeah. Or
Uh,
why did that go so well? Like
yeah,
actually
absolutely.
we had a
Yeah,
really great day out. I wonder what we, what
but
yeah, what worked.
yeah,
Love
exactly.
that.
So you're right. The opposite way, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll keep a note of those. What was good? What
Yeah.
helped? How can we recreate it?
Yeah.
And we can't always. It's not
No.
always possible. But
No.
the bigger that charging list is, the
Mm.
more options you've got, at least.
Mm.
Yeah, and the more you can understand what goes on the draining list specific to your child,
Yeah.
the easier it is to kind of get ahead of some of those things, if possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think sometimes for parents of children who are neurodiverse, it can feel like, oh gosh, we can't do anything, we can't go anywhere. I've definitely worked with parents who have this very bleak sense of nothing is ever going to work. So I love this as a tool. Is there something that makes this hard for parents, do you think, to have this kind of thought or to look at things in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much to juggle anyway, isn't there? No,
Yeah.
one thing that makes things hard, I think, is there's so much to do. And I think most parents are doing their best to support their child in whatever way possible when they're in the midst of a meltdown or getting overwhelmed. And, it's kind of, let's just respond and take them out of the situation and do something else, and that's it. And it's hard to what can we get ahead of, or what can we do proactively, because you're just trying to manage in the moment. So I think that's one thing that makes it hard, but also it can be hard to identify what the triggers are. People often say they just went from 0 to 100, or
Yeah,
they,
it came out of nowhere. I know, and I'm always
yeah,
saying it didn't, nothing ever comes out of nowhere.
yeah, but
Yeah,
I get it. It seems like that. It certainly looks that way,
seems
doesn't
like
it?
it. Yeah.
Definitely. But really, there's probably a lot of slow triggers or
Yeah.
things that are building up under the surface, and things, sensory experiences, or those other things we mentioned, where there's a lot going on that we can't see. And if your child doesn't have the ability to say, I'm starting to feel stressed, or I'm starting to feel
Mm,
overwhelmed, or they can't identify that within themselves,
yeah.
it's hard then, isn't it, for anyone to identify what were some of those things that led us here today.
Yeah.
So the more you can, literally just keep a bit of a diary and try to look at the patterns of what was happening on those days, and ask school to do the same if possible. And even just for a couple of weeks, the more likely it is to notice, okay, that seemed to happen each time, or
Mm.
maybe there was something about the space we were in that meant that was more likely on that day. Because I think it's hard, isn't it? There's so much to juggle, and very
And
hard.
parents,
That's
and
it.
I
Yeah.
think sometimes parents get a bit frustrated with kids because they say, tell me we're getting overwhelmed. Then when the child doesn't, they're like, well, why didn't you tell me? And I think you're right. It's quite a thing for a young person to really learn to read their internal signals, particularly kids with autism.
Definitely. And we often talk with parents of autistic children about this idea of emotional literacy, like building up their skills of learning about their emotions, and different ways to do that. And you can do it in really simple ways, drawing out a gingerbread man body, and, drawing on different feelings at different parts of your body and things like that. And, building up skills about learning your emotions can help to contribute to knowing
Mm.
what some of these triggers, what are some of the battery drainers. But
Yeah.
it takes time, and it's not
Takes
easy.
time.
Yeah.
No.
No. Yeah.
Oh, well, Alex, thank you so much. If we could end, if there was just one thing you could say to parents that they could kind of take away from today's podcast to help in this situation, what would it be?
It doesn't need to be complicated. And that's not to dismiss the complexity of things. Obviously, it's complicated just being a parent. But in terms of what is on the battery charging list, it can be really sort of simple things like, okay, take this child out of the environment for a little bit. Let's all just be quiet for a little bit, for example. That's maybe enough to charge someone's battery for a while. Or, it doesn't have to be lots of complicated psychological support that drains someone's or charges someone's battery. It can be something relatively simple. And yeah, I would just say, just take your time with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Give it a go,
I love it.
yeah.
Amazing. Oh, Alex, thank you so much for today.
All right.
So many useful ideas and tips for parents, and good luck with parents with, who's struggling in this way. And thanks again.
Absolutely. It's tough. So yes, good luck. But yeah, you can do it. You can do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.